Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. It is our weekend edition. If you'd like to join the conversation at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Of course, we have our regular roundtable. Penna, Dexter sitting across from me. In just a few minutes, Kelly Shackelford will be with us. And we're going to talk a little bit about the New Hampshire primary, which is kind of in the rear view mirror. But some of you have been asking questions about how is it, especially on the Democratic side, that Bernie Sanders wins 60-38, and yet she comes away with more delegates. So we're going to get into that. Also, whether it's time for certain candidates to drop out, and new information about some voter irregularities. You know, after all, New Hampshire implemented the voter ID laws because of some of those undercover videos by James O'Keefe, who was on the program with us just recently. Well, they went in this week and found out, it may be helping, but not completely. It just illustrates again why we need voter ID laws. Last night we had a Democratic debate, and so we'll have a chance to hear about some of the comments from that Democratic presidential debate. On to South Carolina, a lot of people asking, well, is it a 5-man race? Is it a 3-man race? Is it a 2-man race? And of course, when Kelly Shackelford joins us later, we'll talk about some issues related to religious liberty. That will probably cover it, but if we run out of time, and we never do, but we certainly have some other issues. Penna earlier in the week talked about whether women should register for the draft. We have questions about how to roll back big government. Always, Penna, we have lots to talk about.
Well, we do, and it's exciting now because they're actually amassing votes. The election has started. The primaries have started, the caucuses have started, and candidates are going to be winning votes. But this is a big question here. The early states, the parties have certain rules about the states who have their primaries early. For those, they really try to discourage early primaries. And so I think that's part of the reason. But I want to get from you, since you're the expert on all things political and constitutional, why this is that Bernie Sanders isn't getting more votes than Hillary, because he won pretty big in New Hampshire.
Certainly did. And a lot of it has to do with something that is a phenomenon more in the Democratic Party. It's a little bit in the Republican Party, but it's very much the case in the Democratic Party, where they have what are called superdelegates. There are 700. And if you type in the word superdelegates on Wikipedia, you can see the name of it. And there's some former presidential candidates like Walter Mondale. There are current governors like Governor Cuomo. And you go all the way down the list. There are members of Congress, and then there are party regulars, but there are 700 of them. Now, this was something 8 years ago we talked a little bit about, and that is as Barack Obama began to win a caucus here and a primary here, a lot of people said, well, he's going to be odds-on nominee. And we said at the time, well, not necessarily, because most of the superdelegates are not committed. In other words, they are not tied to any particular election. And so as a result, they can vote however they want. And so right now, if you actually total this up, if you add in the superdelegates, Bernie Sanders has 44 delegates, but Hillary Clinton has 394, because most of those are the so-called superdelegates that are already committed to her.
Can they change their position as time goes on if they see the writing on the wall?
And that's what happened last time. Eventually, as Barack Obama began to win primary after primary, a lot of them that might have voted for Hillary Clinton said, okay, the deal is over. We're going to vote for him. And yet, for people that are listening right now, grab something to write with, because this might help you out a little bit to understand what's going on. And since we're talking about the Democrats for just a minute, we're going to be talking about the Democratic debate. You need there's 4,763 delegates total, 4,763. And if you do your math, you need 2,382. So the bottom line is right now, whether Hillary Clinton has 394 or Bernie Sanders has 44, not a big deal. But if it gets close, if Bernie Sanders keeps winning occasionally, and he doesn't have to win all of it, and many of these particular primaries, it's not winner take all. So maybe she gets 60% of the delegates, he gets 40% of the delegates. If he wins occasionally, it could get to the point where neither of them have the requisite number of delegates from the primaries and the caucus, but the superdelegates put her over. And if that happens, I am here to tell you that there are going to be a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters that will be furious. Now, if that's not enough, you've just had something else that is played out, and that is, it used to be that individuals running in the Democratic Party could not receive donations from federal lobbyists and political action committees. Well, they've changed those rules, and that again plays in the favor of Hillary Clinton. So whether you look at the superdelegates, which has been on the table, or the issue of now some of these contributions that used to be banned and now are making it available, you can see that there are going to be at least a few supporters of Bernie Sanders that somewhere along the line are going to say, we agree with Bernie Sanders. Not only is the economy rigged, because that's his argument, but the whole campaign process and the Democratic Party is rigged. And so I thought it was interesting to try just briefly to explain why Hillary Clinton lost 60-38 in New Hampshire, and yet so far has 394 delegates, and Bernie Sanders has 44.
So in the Democrat side, donations from these PACs and lobbyists can now be made directly to campaigns?
That's what it looks like. That comes from the Washington Post. So it seems like here again we have some of the rules.
This is just decided
changed
by the Democrats.
That is.
But the Republicans don't have that situation.
They don't. This is part of the Democratic National Committee, and they rolled that back. Now, part of that was implemented.
Seems like rules changing in the middle of the game.
It sure does. And see, a lot of this was, quote, introduced by Barack Obama when he was campaigning. And, of course, it's something that Bernie Sanders would agree with. We shouldn't be having these K Street lobbyists influencing the primary process. But you kind of get a little bit of a sense of, was there some pressure from Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, or others, or just the establishment saying, okay, this has gone long enough. We cannot have Bernie Sanders be our nominee. So the games that are being played right now in the Democratic Party could create some real tension, I suspect.
All right, one more question. Does the Republican Party have superdelegates?
They have a handful, but nothing like that. And again, if you're writing some numbers down, I just gave you the number of delegates in the Democratic Party. You have 4,763 delegates in the Democratic Party, 2,382 needed for a nomination. The numbers are almost half on the Republican. There are 2,472 delegates, and you need 1,237. So you need about 1,200 delegates. And you can see right now Donald Trump has 17, Ted Cruz has 11, Marco Rubio has 10, and all the way down the list. But you're going to need a lot more than 17. You're going to need 1,200. And so this, again, is why some people, and after the break maybe we'll talk about that, are suggesting the possibility. I don't think it's going to happen, but it's a possibility, especially on the Republican side, where you could have a contested convention or what some people called a brokered convention, where Donald Trump doesn't have 1,200 delegates and Marco Rubio doesn't have them and Ted Cruz doesn't have them. And at this point, then there's all sorts of horse trading and things like that, where maybe
usually the RNC gets their man then.
Yes.
At that point.
And at that point, then there aren't as many of those superdelegates. They could make a difference, but at that point, if indeed you're splitting it with 3 or 4 or 5, and that's where we'll come back and talk about, is this a 3-person race? Is it a 5-man race? But if it out of South Carolina is one where Bush and Kasich and Carson are still alive in some sense, they're still taking delegates, and they have been. So this is why you have the contest, just to see what actually surfaces. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation about this campaign and take your phone calls. That coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Seth Shostak believes that this could be humanity's last century, but don't think that he's a pessimist. He's the director of the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence and warns us about potential dangers on the horizon, but also explains that our 21st century technology holds great promise. He believes we will be able to understand biology at the molecular level. That will give humanity the ability to cure all diseases, but it will also usher in an era of designer babies. He believes we will eventually produce offspring that are as different from us as dogs are from gray wolves. He also believes that we will expand into space to obtain additional resources such as copper, zinc, and platinum. Humanity might establish colonies on the moon or Mars. We might also develop huge orbiting habitats in space. He also predicts that we will develop generalized artificial intelligence. This will allow machines to take over jobs normally done by humans, and it is impossible, at least in the near future, that robotics will be so advanced that it will be difficult to tell the difference between who is a real human and who is a machine. If his predictions are true, and I believe they're fairly accurate, then we will need wisdom and morality to guide us through these new advances. Put simply, we need Christian ethics and morality like never before. Unfortunately, the moral foundation behind much of these technological advances is a secular humanistic one. We need Christians in the fields of science and engineering to provide moral reflection. And we cannot retreat into a belief that Jesus will return before all of these technologies are developed. He may not return when we think that he might. We should not be preoccupied with his coming. We need to occupy until he comes. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Columbia Pictures, Aldi Entertainment, and Affirm Films present Risen, the resurrection through the eyes of a non-believer. Risen, rated PG-13 in theaters February 19th.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, it is Open Line, and also, of course, our weekend edition. Penna, Dexter, Kelly Shackelford has joined us now. And before I get any further, Kelly, I wanted to say thank you for hosting the program last week. I earlier in the week thanked Alan West and you, and of course, also Louis Gomert, who was sitting in this chair last Friday, and it was just fun. Even though I'm in Budapest, Hungary, I can watch you guys in studio and see what's happening and listen. And it's 8 hours different, so it's about 9 o'clock at night. But that's okay. That was just it was a really enjoyable time. So thank you so much for doing that as well.
It's a pleasure to do, and really just an honor to be on Point of View. It's just such a great program for everybody in the country.
Well, and we've picked up some more radio stations, but I'll probably announce those next week.
Great.
So we're really excited about seeing it growing. And we've been talking
It's probably
about
those great guest hosts.
Yeah, it probably was. Just keep bringing the Alan West and Kelly Shackelford and Louis Gomert, and we'll just keep building this network. So it'll be fun. We have been talking about the delegate count. And Kelly, I'm glad you can now join us because you have been a delegate to the National Convention. You've actually sat on the platform committee. And usually by the time you end up in the National Convention, it's really obvious that John McCain is the nominee, Mitt Romney's the nominee. But we have a phenomenon where, true, Donald Trump has 17 delegates, Ted Cruz has 10, Marco Rubio has 10. Actually, Cruz has 11, now at 10. But Kasich has 5, Bush has 4, Carson has 3. And if you keep splitting it among, say, it is at least theoretically possible that you might not have any one candidate that has the requisite 1,200 delegates in order to actually be the nominee.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some talk about that recently, typically by the more moderate candidates because they're kind of hoping.
Yeah. I don't think it's going to happen, but it's at least more theoretically possible than any other year I can remember.
Rubio's campaign is talking about it now.
Yeah,
and I think
they're hoping.
They're hoping.
Whistling in the wind, maybe, but still.
I mean, look, as you say, it takes, 1,237 to win. And right now, Donald Trump has 17. I mean, we are really early on.
Yeah, so don't.
And what's going to happen is, I think South Carolina and we're going to weed out. I mean, we're going to be down to, I think either 2 or 3 people pretty soon. And I think South Carolina, the big if is it going to be Cruz or is it going to be Trump?
Right.
I mean, that's what everybody's looking for. But I think that, if it's down to Cruz and Trump, most of the polls show Cruz winning. If it's Trump, Cruz, and somebody else,
right,
I think Donald Trump would win because I think you're splitting the vote more. There's sort of a pro-Trump and sort of I'm not comfortable with that guy vote, and the I'm not comfortable with that guy vote kind of splits among different people. So even though really Cruz and Trump are sort of considered both the anti-establishment candidates. It's very different. It's really a different election. I don't think I've ever seen this. I think I heard Rush Limbaugh say yesterday that Trump is anti-establishment, but he's not conservative. It's not that he's liberal. He's just not anything. Mm-hmm. And so if you want to vote for the conservative, you're going to vote for Ted Cruz. If you want to vote for the populist kind of guy who's going to sort of change everything, but he really doesn't have any sort of compass as far as any of these issues, then Trump. And so that we've just never had that before.
I worry about the things that would keep some of these candidates in.
Yes.
Ben Carson should be out by now.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
For some reason, he's hanging on. There's lots of theories why.
He's hoping that he'll be third in South Carolina, and if not, then I think he's out. Yeah.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
Then John Kasich, he put all of his eggs in Massachusetts. In New Hampshire, worked hard.
Carolina. Yeah.
But he also has in his mind when this all hits the Midwest, gets up to Ohio, which is where he's governor. So will he stick it out till then? Jeb Bush, some people have said, well, now all of a sudden we're going to switch, and Bush is going to take delegates, and Rubio's going to wane. And he's going to take some of the people that Rubio would have taken, just because Rubio sort of had a Perry moment. So that would leave Bush in there longer because he has money. So there's some factors that keep this race, just filled with people who are pulling delegates here and there, as you said, and taking us further down the road than is comfortable for people who just do not want to see Trump the nominee.
It's interesting.
Yeah, and I think Trump's only hope, really. I mean, again, everybody says he's going to win, he's going to win, he's going to win. He's going to win as long as there's a number of candidates in the race. And if it's two candidates, though, again, the polling has always shown, or has everyone I've seen, has shown that if it were he and Cruz, he would lose. Because a lot of those anti-establishment people, if they were picking between those two, would pick Cruz. And then if it's a number of the other ones wouldn't, because they're not anti-establishment, right? So as long as they're staying, they allow crazy. Trump, if he has 30% or 35% or whatever, he can continue to win with that. But if it's all of a sudden where you got to get 50%, 51%, totally different story. And so I think it's fascinating to watch. And the other thing I would say that people aren't paying attention to is right now the delegates are proportional. In other words, it's not a winner take all.
Later on, you do have some winner take alls.
Yeah, if Texas, which is coming up in,
and it's 155 Republican delegates, by the way, too. Yeah,
yeah. I mean,
it's the biggest prize so far.
You look at Texas,
and that's March 1st.
March 1st,
which is huge. And then you got all the SEC at that same time. You got Georgia and all these other states.
Right.
But that's proportional, right?
Yeah.
And so that could cut amongst different people. Again, I think by then we'll be down to 2 or at the most 3. But right after that, I think 2 weeks after that, if I'm not mistaken, everything is not proportional from then on. It's winner take all.
It's somewhat more.
And so that's why it's very unlikely that somebody's not going to be able to get the number to be, of delegates to be nominated. And that's why I think it's very unlikely that you're going to have a contested convention. So there's just a lot left, and it's sort of building in momentum is the way the system is built this time, and that's why I guess some people are staying in because they figure, hey, we're just starting. There's things that are going to build, and if I can just catch wind here right now, I've still got a shot. But I for the life of me, I don't understand why Ben Carson is still in the race.
Or Gilmore.
Gilmore, yeah, that's a little silly.
Carly Fiorina and Chris Christie went. Just before we run out of time, though, because we want to move on to the Democratic debate last night, 2 lessons out of New Hampshire. And Kelly, I want to give you high praise. Months ago, you talked about the fact that Ted Cruz not only had raised a lot of money, but he also had learned that you want to have a really low burn rate. Mm-hmm. And when people were calculating that he was spending, in round numbers, about $18 per vote, and you saw the numbers for Bush, they just have burned through money on the Bush campaign. and they may not have a whole lot left, whereas Ted Cruz is sitting on still quite a bit of funds, which are going to be important now as you get to the Super Tuesday, March 1st. So one of the things that he did in a very smart way was not just going staying at 4-star hotels and having these swank kinds of things and renting all these planes. He recognized that getting on a bus is just fine, and look what happened for him.
No, I think everybody is said that if you ask who's had the most brilliant campaign as far as infrastructure and everything they've done, is Ted Cruz. Really smart. He's a smart guy. I mean, his job was to be a lawyer for highly complex appellate cases, arguing for the U.S. Supreme Court. So obviously he's used to thinking strategically and ahead. And the result of that is he's got the most money, of any of the candidates, and he's got the best campaign structure. And with that, the most volunteers. Now, again, people would probably guess, well, I would think Trump would have the most volunteers. He doesn't have an organizational effort. So, Ted Cruz has over 200,000 people.
Yes.
And they have phone banks. I mean, I saw at some deal, I think it was on TV I saw, but he was thanking it. I think it was in Iowa, a 13-year-old girl who had made 800 calls that day.
I saw that, yeah.
And so that's the kind of thing, that's why you can get a lot more with less money, and he's got the money. So it's an unusual thing for the conservative candidate to have sort of the infrastructure and the money to actually go long term.
One thing he does, too, is he continues to offer legislation and introduce bills and team up with other senators or with members of Congress to introduce common sense legislation that goes along with his campaign planks. And I think that's very wise on his part, because it differentiates him from Rubio, who is said not to have done much. And it also just shows that he is going to be a hard-working president that's going to get some things done or undone.
Yes. Well, and the other point of that is if you're running as a fiscal conservative and you say, I'm going to run the country the way I ran my campaign, you're much more likely to believe Ted Cruz than you are Jeb Bush. Is that a fair statement? Yeah. I mean, when you look at the amount of money the Bush campaign has spent just to get a fraction of those votes, you have to say, I hope you wouldn't run a company or the country that way. So that's another one of those issues coming out of New Hampshire. Well, we had a Democratic presidential debate last night, and we have some opportunities to hear from Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. So we'll do that right after this.
Pictures and LD Entertainment, in association with Affirm Films, the studio that brought you Heaven is for Real and War Room, comes Risen, the biblical story of the resurrection as told through the eyes of a non-believer.
The body has vanished.
His tomb is empty.
Risen, starring Joseph Fiennes, rated PG-13, may be inappropriate for children under 13, in theaters February 19th. More information is available at risen-movie.com.
Are you concerned about what's happening in our colleges, our marketplace, in the halls of government? Let me ask, have you invested in things that yield a good harvest? If you're already giving to Point of View each month, we thank you. You share in the reward for what we harvest. If you're not, now is the time. $30, $65, $100. The more you invest on a regular basis, the more we'll reap together. Give online at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Click at the top on Become a Monthly Partner or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition in studio with me today, as always, Penna, Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. Just a great opportunity to hear from them, but we also want to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. Now you've seen an Iowa caucus. You've seen a New Hampshire primary. We're just a little over a week away to South Carolina, at least for the Republican Party in terms of that primary. For you Democrats listening, that is the same day as the Nevada Democratic Caucus. Then you have the Republican caucus on the 23rd, the South Carolina primary on the 27th, and then on March 1st, 12 primaries, as well as one caucus in Alaska for our listeners up there as well. But let's, if we can, go to the Democratic presidential debate last night. Some good questions were asked by the PBS moderators that had not been asked before: abortion, Planned Parenthood, and a few others. But I thought one of the most important questions we'll start with has to do with the size and scope of government. One of the articles I've posted here, How to Roll Back Big Government for a Free Economy and a Free People, coming from an individual who's a professor at the University of California at Berkeley, served in the Bush administration, and is a visiting scholar with the American Enterprise Institute. And there is a real difference. If there is any obvious difference, it's between two candidates last night that want to expand dramatically the size and scope of government, and most of the Republicans that want to reduce it. So the question was asked first to Bernie Sanders, and then a response by Hillary Clinton. Kind of, how big does this government get?
I do believe that in the year 2016, we have to look in terms of public education as colleges, as part of public education, making public colleges and universities tuition free. I believe that when real unemployment is close to 10%, and when our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our water systems, Flint, Michigan comes to mind, our wastewater plants, our rail, our airports, in many places are disintegrating, we can create 13 million jobs by rebuilding our infrastructure at a cost of $1 trillion.
But my question is, how big would government be? Would there be any limit on the size and role of government?
Of course there will be a limit. But when today you have massive levels of income and wealth inequality, when the middle class is disappearing, you have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. Yes, in my view, the government of a democratic society has a moral responsibility to play a vital role in making sure that all of our people have a decent standard of living.
The best analysis that I've seen based on Senator Sanders' plans is that it would probably increase the size of the federal government by about 40%. But what is most concerning to me is that in looking at the plans, let's take health care, for example. Last week in a CNN town hall, the senator told a questioner that the questioner would spend about $500 in taxes to get about $5,000 in health care. Every progressive economist who has analyzed that says that the numbers don't add up. And that's a promise that cannot be kept. And it's really important, now that we are getting into the rest of the country, that both of us are held to account for explaining what we are proposing, because especially with health care, this is not about math. This is about people's lives, and we should level with the American people about what we can do to make sure they get quality, affordable health care.
Again, just surprising when they ask that question, but it's a good question to be asking at a time when we have $19 trillion in debt. Penna, when we have even the economist that was quoted by Hillary Clinton that said that that would increase the government's cost by another 40%. I think that's a low number. I think it could eventually double the size and scope of the government, which is huge right now. With all the things that Bernie Sanders is proposing, I think that's a good question to ask.
Well, it is a good question. And, you know, when I look at Bernie Sanders amassing support and Donald Trump amassing support, I mean, really, you know, we assume that Republicans are going to try to shrink the size of government. But what evidence do we have that Donald Trump would shrink the size of government? Many of the things he says tell me that he would also increase the size of government from the get-go. So both of these candidates need to be held accountable. I mean, I'm glad Hillary does that. There were other times when they were just, you know, basically yelling at each other and about who was going to increase programs more. So she talks out of both sides of her mouth.
Yeah, it's kind of scary to look at some of the, and what's really scary is the people that are actually behind these people. I mean, we've got an avowed socialist in Bernie Sanders with, a really almost equal support now when you look at the national polls on the Democratic side. I don't think that's anything that most of us thought we would ever see in our lifetime. Americans saying, yeah, I want to vote for the guy who calls himself a socialist. Just, bizarre. You watch this and you think, is there this huge a difference between the Republican and the Democratic Party? Is it there's this big chasm now, or is it that both parties have swung way much further to the left than they used to be? But because what's going on in the Republican Party is really bizarre too, right?
Yes.
You've got a populist kind of situation with a guy who doesn't say he stands on the Reagan three-legged conservative stool. He's, when he was asked about health care, Donald Trump said, he's got to get rid of Obamacare, but then he wants to replace it with universal health care. So,
that sounds like Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
Even more so than Hillary Clinton.
And so it's really interesting to watch this, but it's almost like, on the Democratic Party, they've just gone way to the left so far that they're almost into, communism. And then on the Republican Party, I think there's been a lurch as well. And so it really is different. I think it all stems out of the fact that government's not working, that government's not responsive,
right?
That especially on the Republican side, that the Republican leadership in the House and the Senate have been incredibly tone deaf and have gone into office and not done what they said they would do. The system is just bent to and so I think people are ready to blow up the system and try something different. And that's why you have Bernie Sanders doing well. That's why you have Ted Cruz and Donald Trump doing well.
Let me take some phone calls along the way, because instead of just having all of them in the second hour, kind of take one along the way. But certainly we're going to also hear from some of the Democratic nominees as well as the Republicans as well. But I thought I would jump to South Carolina for just a minute on the Good News Network, because Connie, I guess you had a chance to go out there and see Marco Rubio. So I'd love to know what you felt when you had a chance to go out and hear him.
Hi. Yes, I did. I am very impressed with Marco Rubio, and I started with an open mind with all of the candidates, and being a Christian, I wanted to pick the one that I felt was the most, had the most Christian values, and so I've watched every debate and listened to him. I got a chance to go listen to Marco Rubio in person yesterday, and he is a Christian. I truly believe that. He stands behind Israel. And, some of the other Christian values like abortion, he's against abortion. But the fact that he said the words, Jesus Christ was the only Savior in that one debate, I just thought was amazing. And I wish I could scream at the rooftops that he is the most Christian person. And we've got to get somebody back in there that's got some kind of Christian values, or we're in big trouble.
Sure. Well, it's interesting that you had Donald Trump and Ted Cruz both at Liberty University. Marco Rubio was not, but a lot of people have said, he really has Christian values. I know that he had Greg Laurie introduce him when he announced and some things of that nature. And certainly we have the advantage with the people like a Ted Cruz and a Marco Rubio. We're talking about people with very deep Christian evangelical commitments, as well as, of course, Ben Carson.
We have an abundance of riches in one sense. And I think when you look at Marco Rubio and evaluate him, let's say against Ted Cruz, because Marco Rubio articulates theology very well. Ted Cruz is just his whole background of being a Christian is there. And most recently this week, his wife did a very good job of articulating that.
We need to get back to that in just a minute. Go ahead.
Yeah, but who's going to pull out the corruption root and branch? Is it going to be Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio? And the people that are so concerned that they're going to go for a Trump, a lot of times I think they don't really know what they're supporting at this point. They're not looking for someone to manage our decline, which I think Rubio would have a tendency to do. He'd be more quasi-establishment. They're looking for someone that would make big changes and be very bold and brave to do so. So that's the difference between those two.
Yeah, that was I actually struggled at first when I was looking at all the candidates. I didn't understand why the media and everybody, I mean, every time you see Rubio mentioned, he's mentioned as one of the establishment candidates. Right. And it didn't make sense to me because if you looked at what Rubio, he's a strong, he's outspoken with his Christian faith. He's strong on, if he says, is he pro-life? Yes. If you ticked off the issues, he and Ted Cruz would look almost exactly the same.
And both ran with the Tea Party, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The difference is, though, because I asked people, especially people in D.C. who were like making a big difference between the two, and they said it's who they stand with. So if there's a battle in the Senate, where does Rubio stand? He stands with the establishment. So although he has these values,
I see.
He's going to go with the flow a little bit, and obviously Ted Cruz is not the go with the flow. So that's the big difference between the two. Although I think they would tick off a lot of the same issues and have the same faith background as far as, at least to some level.
Let's come back and talk about Heidi Cruz. That's one of those issues in the news, and maybe you guys can give some perspective. We'll be right back.
One thing that makes Israel such a wonderful destination for the Christian is that things the believers know to be true are affirmed there and illustrated in sharp relief. You expect that to happen when you walk where Jesus walked and when you view with your own eyes the places described in both the Old and New Testaments. But Israel is also a land of the unexpected. On a recent pilgrimage to the Holy Land, my second within 15 months, the unexpected took place. Our group visited Qasr el-Yahud, the site that commemorates the baptism of Christ. Matthew 3 describes how Jesus convinced a reluctant John the Baptist to baptize him. The pastor leading our group was also asked to do a baptism, a man in his early 40s who, along with his parents, was traveling with us. There was no reluctance on this pastor's part, only a set of pointed questions to determine if this man was ready to follow Christ. The air was slightly chilly, and the water of the Jordan River was chillier. The river, narrow at that spot, separates two countries, Israel and Jordan, by like 10 yards. All eyes were on the baptism. But as our new brother in Christ rose out of the water, we heard something, and our eyes went to a group of nuns gathered on the Jordan side, singing Amazing Grace. We joined in, as did other pilgrims. These nuns were Sisters of the Rosary and hailed from countries like Egypt and Lebanon. Because of their nationalities and the politics of the region, some could not have legally stood on our side of the river in Israel. And yet, as members of one body, we celebrated God's work in the life of one whom He has called. The pastor issued one simple instruction to the man he was baptizing. Remember that you are sealed by the Holy Spirit in baptism and marked as Christ's own forever. That night, the pastor blogged about this, calling it an international incident. You can read about it at AnglicanPastor.com. One of the sisters saw the story and contacted the pastor. The nuns, she said, would be praying for this young believer as he begins his walk with Christ. The two marveled at God's work that spans national and doctrinal divisions. Anglicans baptize by sprinkling, but this man wanted to be immersed, to go all in, as it were. We still had a bus ride, so he encouraged the pastor not to get into the cold, muddy river with him. The pastor would have none of it, saying, "No one is ever baptized alone." How true. Baptism is about much more than your particular and individual salvation. We are baptized into a worldwide body, into a community of believers, some whom we know and will know, and some we will never know this side of heaven. And at this, the nuns rejoice. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford. We'll get back to the Democratic debate because there's some other comments that we wanted you to hear. But since we were talking about Ted Cruz and Heidi Cruz just a minute ago, I've always said that a scandal in Washington is when somebody tells the truth. But the corollary is a scandal in the media is when somebody says something Christian. And Heidi Cruz crossed the line. She's the wife of Ted Cruz, in which she actually suggested that maybe even though we should obviously be tolerant of other viewpoints, certain things are right and certain things are wrong. And the reaction, Kelly Shackelford, has been rather significant, hasn't it?
Oh, it was unbelievable. I know I put it on Facebook and it just blew up. I remember everybody was like, "Oh my gosh," they couldn't believe that this is what was scandalous to the media. And I just think it's funny. It just shows how to touch the idea that, well, how dare she say that it's a Judeo-Christian, founded country and that has all these principles in place. And, I think they've highlighted that, Ted Cruz's wife, Heidi, is a very accomplished woman, Goldman Sachs and all this. What they don't talk about is she's a missionary kid, and a strong, has a strong faith. And that's the only reason why she and Ted Cruz decided they were going to run, because of prayer and their faith. And she's very open about, she's not the type to just say, I'm going to just throw my career away now and go and do this kind of crazy campaign thing. She did it because she feels God's leading her to do that. And that kind of language is so foreign to the people covering the campaign, but it's not to most Americans. It's how they live. And so this is a great, just looking at this story, if people haven't done it, I encourage them to go look online. It immediately shows you the two different worlds going on in the United States, and how clueless some people are.
Well, and again, we've got some stuff from the Media Research Center, Penna, that you've been looking at, and every year you have some of those, but this might make the 2006 worst of the worst, because some of the people just are losing any kind of sense of perspective and afraid that this theocracy is going to be implemented and the walls between church and state that have been erected are going to be tumbling down, and all the kinds of hyperbole that you might have expected from a fundraising letter from a atheist group are showing up right now in some of these blog posts and even some of the commentary that's taking place.
It's revealing, where we are as a culture. But still, I don't think Heidi and Ted Cruz have made a mistake by doing this at all. In fact, their timing is perfect. It's spot on with South Carolina primary coming. And, all the candidates fall all over themselves to talk about how Christian they are, even Donald Trump.
Yes.
On the Republican side, that is, because they know that in primaries, it's evangelicals who vote, who get active, who make the calls, who walk the neighborhoods. Evangelicals are, disproportionately active because many of them, and I wish more would, feel that it's a stewardship opportunity to influence the culture. And I love how Heidi says that, Christians aspire to show the face of God in all that we do. And, a lot of us, when we look at our daily lives and we're walking through our day and things are hitting us where, we're tempted to get upset or blame somebody or, throw somebody under the bus. That's one thing that helps us to remember in our Christian walk that we're God's representatives. And Heidi and Ted believe that they are that. And so that's why they're running. They've put their own financial resources into it.
Yes.
And so as I mentioned a few weeks ago, I got to sit next to Heidi Cruz at an event here in Dallas. Yes. So I got to know her a little bit. And I was, I saw the genuineness there, the mother in her, the businesswoman, and the braininess, and the beauty. She's beautiful too. So
by the way, two of the smartest people you can sit next to, isn't that right? You guys have met them. I've never have, but from what I hear, they're just unbelievably off the charts, brilliant kind of people.
Yeah, and the thing is, though, they don't come across that way. Heidi comes across as a mom with two little girls, and and a missionary kid, who
by the way works for Goldman Sachs.
Yeah,
did, yes.
You wouldn't know that, amazing. Is the thing.
Yeah.
And you would, again, it does kind of shock your culture a little bit when you see somebody, Goldman Sachs, and then they speak so openly of their faith. I'm sure that is very countercultural there. So, it's just interesting, though, that this is the kind of thing that's shocking, Meanwhile, the kind of words that are coming out of the things that Donald Trump is saying, I can't even say them on the air.
The words that he used, or somebody in the audience
and
used.
And then he repeated. That's not shocking.
Which we will not say on this air. Let me just get back to at least one more clip from the Democratic debate, because we'll have a lot more to cover in the second hour. But moving to South Carolina, the African-American vote, very important for Democrats. And some people have jokingly said it's not so much Black Lives Matter as Black Voters Matter. So obviously one of the questions had to do with race relations.
I think President Obama has set a great example. I think he has addressed a lot of these issues that have been quite difficult, but he has gone forward. Now, what we have to do is to build on an honest conversation about where we go next. We now have much more information about what must be done to fix our criminal justice system. We now have some good models about how better to provide employment, housing, and education. So I think what President Obama did was to exemplify the importance of this issue as our first African-American president, and to address it both from the president's office and through his advocacy, such as working with young men and Mrs. Obama's work with young women.
When you have childhood African-American poverty rates of 35%, when you have youth unemployment at 51%, when you have unbelievable rates of incarceration, which, by the way, leaves the children back home without a dad or even a mother, clearly we are looking at institutional racism. We are looking at an economy in which the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And sadly, in America today, in our economy, a whole lot of those poor people are African American.
So race relations would be better under a Sanders presidency than they've been?
Right, absolutely. Because what we will do is say, instead of giving tax breaks to billionaires, we are going to create millions of jobs for low-income kids so they're not hanging out on street corners. We're going to make sure that those kids stay in school or are able to get a college education. And I think when you give low-income kids, African-American, white, Latino kids, the opportunities to get their lives together, they are not going to end up in jail. They're going to end up in the productive economy, which is where we want them.
The difficulty both these candidates face is they're trying to thread the needle. On the one hand, say that there is a lot that needs to happen, but not do it by dumping on the previous president. Because think about this. If indeed you believe that income equality or race relationships have actually deteriorated over the last quarter century, 2/3 of that time you had either as your president Bill Clinton or Barack Obama. And so on one hand, they have to say there's a lot we need to do, but they can't come out, I guess, and really say,
especially Hillary.
Yeah, and say that Obama was a failure. But all of the things they're talking about, some of which may have actually gotten worse over the last 7 years. Your thoughts?
Well, what I notice out of this is how Pollyanna liberals are. Where they think, oh yeah, all these black kids are going to work really hard and pull themselves up by their bootstraps, when we've created a system where they actually are incentivized not to work. And the programs that Bernie Sanders would put into place would make that worse, not better.
Yeah. Well, we need to take a break. When we come back, we have a lot more to talk about with the Democratic presidential debate. I see many of you want to talk about some of the candidates, both Republican and Democrat, so that will be an opportunity for you if you can stay with us, and we'll give you the opportunity to express your opinion as we come back from the break. And take the time to visit our website, Pray, Organize, and Vote. In just a minute, we're going to talk about some of those resources, but as you click there, you'll find some of those resources so that you can make sure you're registered to vote, people you know are registered to vote, and then they can find the voter guide so that they'll know how to vote intelligently. Visit the website, pointofview.net. We'll be back with more right after this.
Later this year, for the 58th time, America will choose a president. As a Christian, what are you doing to prepare for the election? Helping you cut through the major media spin is part of the mission of Point of View. We want to provide the best election resources, including a new website, Pray, Organize, Vote, encouraging people to intercede for the upcoming election, to help you get registered so you can exercise the stewardship of voting, to share things to help you get people involved and out to the polls. But to do all of that, we need you to vote right now with your support for Point of View. Show us that you're in this for the long haul as a citizen of heaven as well as the United States. Click Donate Now at the top of the page and give the most generous one-time gift you can at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. There is a lot of work to be done. Let's get to it together. pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I'm constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, it is our weekend edition. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. And by the way, with Kelly here, we're going to talk about some of these religious liberty issues in just a minute, but also want to give some of you a chance to join the conversation. We've heard a little bit from the Democratic presidential debate. We have a Republican presidential debate on Saturday. I'm going to collect a lot of clips, and we're going to spend a lot of time on Monday analyzing who said what and what that might mean. But in the midst of this, let me give, as I did the other day, I gave preference to people from New Hampshire first. So, again, those of you that have called in or wait in the line, wait to the back of the line for the moment, because I want to go to South Carolina once again, since that's where the next primary is going to take place. We'll go to KJRT and Charles. What would you like to add to the conversation today?
Kerby, I need maybe 2 minutes to get out 3 very important points. I hope I can get it. Wanted to offer a little counterpoint to the other South Carolina caller that praised Marco Rubio. I want to say that all that say "Lord, Lord" are not necessarily of God. And if first of all, I don't think any of your listeners would dispute the fact that Phyllis Schlafly has no axe to grind. And I would refer them to her site Eagle Forum, where she has an article called "The Big Con Begins."
I did read that. It's pretty powerful. I mean, that it's probably one of the most devastating comments I've seen by anybody about Marco Rubio. But go for it.
It paints a picture of a pathological liar. And of course, we all heard him advocate for women on the front lines and women to have to register for the draft in the last debate. Okay, that's one. Second, in terms of the Carson to-do, where Ted Cruz's campaign ran with something that seemed to be pretty obvious. He hadn't been campaigning. You don't go to Florida and then back to New Hampshire to change your underwear, as it were. And Carson and everybody from Karl Rove, the whole establishment, Jindal and Santorum, who couldn't even account for why they endorsed Rubio. It's like they're just obeying orders. And yet, I've heard the most vicious attacks on Cruz, as though he were subhuman, actually, Chris Matthews called him. Well, anyway, Rubio's campaign, I don't hear this emphasized, but Rubio's campaign did exactly what Cruz's did, ran with the thing on Carson.
Yeah, they only talked about Cruz and not Rubio. That's true. That is very true.
Yeah, in Carson's own words, they were unfortunate, but the whole thing was much ado about nothing, as he applied it to Terry Schiavo, unfortunately. But nobody mentions that, and Rubio is the beneficiary of the votes that Cruz loses, and he didn't even apologize. Cruz apologized profusely. And finally, yes, Kelly, I'm glad you brought up that, yes, this Rubio, for all his rhetoric, he sides with the establishment. And let's look at what the establishment has given Obama over the past year and more, that the Republicans have controlled both houses of Congress. I call them rubber stamps, because they rubber stamped the whole agenda. They didn't have to fund Planned Parenthood. They gave them a raise. They funded executive amnesty, Obamacare, a record deficit, what I call refugee hottie resettlement, or the Nuka-Tola deal, as I call it. They even voted on whole bills that didn't just involve funding. ESSA, which institutionalized Common Core. They confirmed all of his judicial nominees, Obama trade, Loretta Lynch, even after she said that she wouldn't have done anything different from Holder, and she's proven that ever since. When you vote, I don't see why anybody would consider voting for somebody that aligns himself with that kind of establishment. But that's Marco Rubio.
Sure. Well, I appreciate your comment on all three of those points. You mentioned one in passing, and if anybody wants to read that, you can find it on WorldNet Daily. You can find it on many times before. I mean, we couldn't even count the number of times Penna Dexter has interviewed Phyllis Schlafly, or I have, and she has this memo that she put out, and it just basically says he betrayed us all. And so she goes into quite a bit of detail about this, and a lot of it gets into the issue of amnesty, and I see some of our callers want to address that issue. So, again, we encourage you to read widely and think deeply about these individuals before you cast your vote.
Well, on the issue of immigration, I mean, I think that's what makes it so, bad in a sense, is Marco Rubio ran as a Tea Party conservative, and then he was the one that crafted a bill that included amnesty and partnered with Chuck Schumer on the Democrat side. And only when the writing was on the wall that this was not going to pass and he started to get the criticism did he pull back from it. And he was so key in advancing that it's impossible for him to pull away from it. And that's, Phyllis Schlafly points out all the steps where that happened.
Mm-hmm.
That issue is so important to a certain sector, the sort of that Tea Party type person.
Right. They
may not be social conservatives on a lot of things, but they're very, very big on the border security. And so they're, they just need to be educated, and Phyllis has taken it upon herself to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that most people would agree on is that Marco Rubio is probably the most charismatic speaker.
Oh,
and so
he lights up a room like anybody.
And so I know the caller earlier got to go see him in person,
Mm-hmm.
and he does it. And he does that, I think, when he's, in the debates and everything else. He's a very gifted speaker, and so I mean, those things are things they look and they go, well, that person's more electable. But I mean, I think the Republicans are at the point where they're not looking to just win an election. They know that winning an election doesn't really turn the ship around when it's about to, crash into the rocks. And so that's why they're looking at Ted Cruz and they're looking at Donald Trump.
Yes.
And the thing about it is that I think that I'm very concerned about is they're both supposedly the anti-establishment candidates. And I just think so many people are going to be shocked that Trump is not an anti-establishment candidate. He is part of the establishment. He's been using money to pay both sides, to play the system. That's how he's done it. That's his whole life. And so that's what he's going to do if he gets in. And I think people are just going to be, perplexed. And I don't know why, because it's just like there's scales on their eyes or something. I know he's using the language and all this, but if he'll say that he's going to change the language and go completely differently if you listen to what he says.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's the interesting thing is people want a change, but I'm scared that all these people are going to be snookered, and I just think they're going to be furious. And I don't know what's going to happen in our country if that happens, but I hope not. I mean, I hope people can see through things, can pick the person they think is really going to do what it is they really want done, and then we'll make good decisions, and we won't end up with Bernie Sanders or some of these folks that would obviously change our countries in ways that we couldn't even fathom.
Penna, you might remember the days when we would have Howard Phillips or Paul Weyrich or others, and they said, you have two kind of philosophies. One that says, well, we're going to go over the cliff, and the Democrats are going to go over 60 miles an hour, but the establishment Republicans will go over 30 miles an hour. And what Ted Cruz is saying is, we're not going over 30 miles an hour. We're doing a U-turn. We're going the other direction. And so that's kind of the mindset. Some of the establishment ones are saying, we might do a little fiddling here and there. Ted Cruz says, no, I can give you 5 different agencies I'm going to end. I haven't heard that since Ronald Reagan ran back in 1980. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Seth Shostak believes that this could be humanity's last century, but don't think that he's a pessimist. He's the director of the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence and warns us about potential dangers on the horizon, but also explains that our 21st century technology holds great promise. He believes we will be able to understand biology at the molecular level. That will give humanity the ability to cure all diseases, but it will also usher in an era of designer babies. He believes we will eventually produce offspring that are as different from us as dogs are from gray wolves. He also believes that we will expand into space to obtain additional resources such as copper, zinc, and platinum. Humanity might establish colonies on the moon or Mars. We might also develop huge orbiting habitats in space. He also predicts that we will develop generalized artificial intelligence. This will allow machines to take over jobs normally done by humans, and it is possible, at least in the near future, that robotics will be so advanced that it will be difficult to tell the difference between who is a real human and who is a machine. If his predictions are true, and I believe they're fairly accurate, then we will need wisdom and morality to guide us through these new advances. Put simply, we need Christian ethics and morality like never before. Unfortunately, the moral foundation behind much of these technological advances is a secular humanistic one. We need Christians in the fields of science and engineering to provide moral reflection. And we cannot retreat into a belief that Jesus will return before all of these technologies are developed. He may not return when we think that he might. We should not be preoccupied with his coming. We need to occupy until he comes. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Columbia Pictures, LD Entertainment, and Affirm Films present Risen, the resurrection through the eyes of a non-believer. Risen, rated PG-13 in theaters February 19th.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Weekend Edition. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. I see most of you want to talk about the Republican candidates, so we'll just maybe play one more clip from the Democratic presidential debate. Of course, we'll have the Republican debate tomorrow night, but I just had to play this one because one of the kind of the back and forth between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton is simply this. In the last debate, it came out that she received $675,000 in speaking fees from Goldman Sachs. And in trying to explain it, it did not go well because she tried to come up with some kind of explanation that didn't really set well, because I think most Americans know that when a company pays you that amount of money to give just 2 speeches or 3 speeches, they expect a lot more than just an informative and entertaining speech. So once again, this issue of campaign contributions came up. Let's hear first from Hillary Clinton, then Bernie Sanders.
My 750,000 donors have contributed more than $1.5 million donations. I'm very proud. That, I think, between the two of us demonstrates the strength of the support we have among people who want to see change in our country. But the real issue that I think the senator is injecting into this is that if you had a super PAC like President Obama had, which now says it wants to support me, it's not my PAC. If you take donations from Wall Street, you can't be independent. I would just say I debated then Senator Obama numerous times on stages like this. And he was the recipient of the largest number of Wall Street donations of anybody running on the Democratic side ever. Now, when it mattered, he stood up and took on Wall Street. He pushed through and he passed the Dodd-Frank regulation the toughest regulations since the 1930s. So let's not in any way imply here that either President Obama or myself would in any way not take on any vested interest, whether it's Wall Street or drug companies or insurance companies or, frankly, the gun lobby, to stand up to do what's best for the American people.
Well, let's not insult the intelligence of the American people. People aren't dumb. Why in God's name does Wall Street make huge campaign contributions? I guess just for the fun of it. They want to throw money around. Why does the pharmaceutical industry make huge campaign contributions? Any connection, maybe, to the fact that our people pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs? Why does the fossil fuel industry spend huge amounts of money on campaign contributions? Any connection to the fact that not one Republican candidate for president thinks and agrees with the scientific community that climate change is real and that we have got to transform our energy system? And when we talk about Wall Street, let's talk about Wall Street. I voted for Dodd-Frank, got an important amendment in it. My view, it doesn't go anywhere near far enough. But when we talk about Wall Street, you have Wall Street and major banks have paid $200 billion in fines since the great crash. No Wall Street executive has been prosecuted.
You know, if this really was a fair fight, you think Bernie Sanders might win, but with all those superdelegates, I'm pretty sure Hillary Clinton might win. But there's another issue we haven't mentioned. I'll just mention in passing because it's pretty insignificant, and that is the possibility and really the likelihood now that she will be indicted. I mean, when they went through some of those emails, they recognized that some of them were at the highest level of classification, what are called SAP, Special Access Program, so high that the Inspector General was not allowed to see them. And to recognize that that server has no doubt been hacked, and people in Russia and China and all sorts of places around the world have access to sensitive information because of what Hillary Clinton did. If it was anybody other than her, she would have already been indicted right now, maybe even charged. So what that does to the campaign, who knows?
If it was anybody other than her, I think they would have cut bait a lot earlier and found someone else.
Yes.
Now they're going to have to do it at the last minute and get a savior, or maybe they don't care.
I don't know. It's kind of intriguing, but this is a Justice Department that has never had a special prosecutor. That's kind of intriguing, especially when you think of all sorts of various scandals, whether it's the IRS or Fast and Furious or even the email scandal. Kelly, you've obviously worked with people in the Justice Department. There'll be days you've got to be rolling your eyes with what's been going on.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you've got to, and look, we've seen the Justice Department under different presidents, and they've done their job. The career lawyers, I mean, very strict about, this is the rule of law. We're going to follow the rule of law. This is the first president where that's been really damaged greatly. I mean, saying we're not going to defend this law that was passed because we don't agree with it. I mean, that just hasn't been done in the past. The outrageous sort of actions and inactions they've taken. I think if Hillary Clinton were to be indicted, I actually think it would probably be a gift to the to the Democratic Party.
She'd be taken out.
I think she'd be out, and I think she's a very poor candidate. And I think she's kind of somewhat of a gift to the Republican side. And so I think that actually if they did that and brought in Biden or somebody else, that would probably be to their benefit. We I don't think they're going to do it because I think no matter what, Comey and the FBI come up with, I think the way they, we can go through the list of Fast and Furious and the IRS.
I just gave you a short list a minute ago.
I mean, numerous things where there was evidence, clear evidence of criminal activity, and nothing happened. And that's because the president ultimately controls this. I mean, the attorney general, but ultimately the president. And so if he doesn't want there to be an indictment of Hillary Clinton, there won't be, no matter what the evidence is. I mean, I hate to be cynical, but I mean, that's just what I've seen. And I actually think if there were to be, which I think there clearly should be in light of the evidence that's already out, that we already know about, you can't have this kind of classified information on a private server. I mean, it just violates all kinds of laws. If they did that, I think the Democratic Party would actually benefit from that because I think they would probably get a better candidate. I think the Clinton machinery is so entrenched that that's the only reason she's not out. And I think most Democrats, if you ask them, would you like a better candidate, would say absolutely.
Yeah. Let's take some phone calls. A lot of you want to talk about the Republican candidates, so that's what we will do, and we'll head out to Texas, KCTA. Tommy, what would you like to add to the conversation today?
Well, I think the spiritual condition of this country is so far gone that you look at Rubio; he's a Roman Catholic wolf in sheep's clothing, and Trump believes in self-salvation. I've heard him say it his own self. He believes in cleaning up his own mess. They asked if he had never trusted Jesus as a savior, and he said, "No, I just believe in cleaning up my own mess." I heard him. And anyway, you look at some of the spiritual so-called leaders of this country. They call Osteen and Rick Warren America's pastors. You got to be kidding me. These guys are wolves in sheep's clothing. The Bible warns you all the way through, from Matthew to the Revelation. Beware of false prophets, wolves in sheep's clothing, false apostles, and they're everywhere.
Do you have any candidates you might support, or you're against all of them?
Cruz, I think, is, as far as I can tell, sounds like a true believer to me. I wish I knew what kind of church he went to and what his core beliefs are. I'd like to cross-examine him, to see if he's real. I think it sounds like he's real because everybody hates him, so that's a good sign.
Okay, just before we take a break, both of you met Ted Cruz. Of course, we've had Rafael Cruz, his father, in studio and by phone twice, so help us out here.
Well, he grew up in a Baptist church in Houston, a very well-known Baptist church, traditional, Orthodox biblical beliefs, and his father was a Baptist pastor. Mm-hmm. So, kind of basic, I think. Most people probably know what that is. And his wife was in a missionary family, and so they both have a pretty strong background, which is why you see the kind of things, when they say things on the campaign trail, they're just saying things like you and I would say. It's not like that there's some big calculation like some of these other people to say things, to say we're like 2 Corinthians or whatever, they don't, it's just, you can tell. And I think Christians can tell. They hear people talk naturally in a way that they always talk. And so that's why the Heidi Cruz thing yesterday, the blow up or whatever, was so ridiculous.
You need a governing philosophy, I think, as a candidate, especially that's almost more important than your faith. We were willing to swallow Mitt Romney because we thought he had somewhat of a governing philosophy. Trump doesn't even try to articulate one. He just kind of rides this populist wave in many cases and makes these pronouncements. And he just says that he's going to make the country great again. So I think people have just taken him and they make him what they want. They make Donald Trump what they want. He's going to do whatever they think is right. I don't know how long that scenario is going to last, if it's going to take us all the way to the end or not.
I might post, too, because we have a list of individuals who are the religious advisors for individuals. I know Rick Warren has been a religious advisor to Marco Rubio. Of course, David Barton has been very much involved in Ted Cruz's campaign. Sometimes you learn a little bit about people's theology by who they hang with, too. So let's take a break. We'll take some more phone calls. We'll be back right after this.
Pictures and LD Entertainment, in association with Affirm Films, the studio that brought you Heaven is for Real and War Room, comes Risen, the biblical story of the resurrection as told through the eyes of a non-believer.
The body has vanished. His tomb is empty.
Risen, starring Joseph Fiennes, rated PG-13, may be inappropriate for children under 13, in theaters February 19th. More information is available at risen-movie.com.
Are you concerned about what's happening in our colleges, our marketplace, and the halls of government? Let me ask, have you invested in things that yield a good harvest? If you're already giving to Point of View each month, we thank you. You share in the reward for what we harvest. If you're not, now is the time. $30, $65, $100. The more you invest on a regular basis, the more we'll reap together. Give online at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Click at the top on Become a Monthly Partner or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join the conversation, almost all the lines are full, so we may not be able to get to your phone call, but you can give it a try. 1-800-351-1212. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. And again, I'm trying to focus on some of those individuals that are in South Carolina because they're going to vote first. And then, of course, hear from some of the rest of you. So again, those of you that are not in South Carolina, just hold on. But let's go to another caller in South Carolina. Veronica, I think you wanted to get involved in this discussion about Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz. So go for it.
Yes, Kerby. I'd like to point out a few things. I've been watching our debates all over since they started, and I only see a few things that it bothers me about our party in general is that this coming and forth between the candidates against each other is not fruitful for our election.
Sure. Everybody's shaking their head around the table. You know, it's the nature of a primary, but it has hurt the candidates. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yes. Senator Rubio has a few points that I like. It's his positivism and enthusiasm to bring us all together. It's not that he's letting go of principle. It's that we need to work together to achieve our goals. And being divided against each other is not going to be fruitful. I don't like Donald Trump. He is offensive. In my opinion, he is just not the adequate person for a president's job. And he's just a narcissist person, in my opinion. I don't even consider him, and I hope so that he's not chosen because this will be the first time for me not voting for a Republican. I'm not voting at all.
What will you do?
Yeah.
I'd be really sad and disappointed.
Will you not vote at all, or will you vote for a Democrat?
Oh, no, there's no way I'm voting for any Democrat. I come from a foreign country, and whoever is not studying what socialism, communism is, there are many of us that are here, thank God, achieving our dreams and moving forward because this country is different, and that's what it makes it great.
That's great.
Where are you from?
Yeah, where are you from? Veronica, where are you from?
I'm originally from El Salvador.
El Salvador, yes.
It reminds me a little bit of what Raphael says.
Yes.
You know, that he's got a credible story coming from Cuba for the freedom in this country. And he says, if we lose it, where do we go?
Where do you go?
I mean, that's his whole point. That's what he taught his kids. And so, boy, you know, people who come from other countries really, I think, have a much clearer view of when we're going in the wrong direction.
South Carolina, WAGP. Steve, thank you for calling as well.
Thanks for taking my call. I just want to say that, in my opinion, Ted Cruz is the most evangelical Christian of the bunch. And I say people have criticized, have told me, well, his wife works for Goldman Sachs. And, you know, that's the big Wall Street bureaucracy. However, Cruz voted against the Wall Street bailout. You know, he stood for his principles. You can look at his voting record. He hasn't changed his mind. And the establishment doesn't like him because of that fact. And I'm afraid, you know, they might try and drive him out because of that. But I'll tell you this, too. He is coming to our church and preaching on Sunday, and it's not a political message. He's going to give his testimony and preach a sermon. And our church is a non-denominational, Bible-based church where our pastor consistently speaks out openly against same-sex marriage, against divorce, against all these things that so many churches and Christians, so-called Christians, are embracing. And he does not give up his pulpit lightly, only to people the likes of Tony Evans has been there. Mike Huckabee has been allowed to speak there. And so No, Alistair Begg has been there too. So I would say that I do not trust Rubio. I think he's saying the right words, and, maybe he is a Christian. I can't say that he isn't, but I think Ted Cruz is the most biblically based and evangelical Christian, and that, to me, is the one criteria that we need to be looking for in this president, because we need to return this nation to biblical values. I don't care if that's what the majority of the country wants or not. It's what we need. And evangelicals need to stand up like they did in Iowa, where they turned out in droves, and we need to do that for the national election.
Well, again, Ted Cruz going to be speaking in that church there.
Yeah, interesting with Steve. Number one, I love Steve's call. Steve, thank your pastor. If we had more pastors that were willing to speak to the issues,
yes.
This would be a much better country. And so I'm just grateful for pastors who are willing to do that, knowing that they're gonna lose maybe some members by doing that. But God's gonna bless them. Yeah. They've just got to trust in Him.
He's taking some heat for this. I'll tell you.
It, yeah.
I'm sure, yeah. I'm just give him our thank you though, because there are many pastors like that out there that are really doing the work, and they're getting attacked, and all they're doing is standing for what the Bible says. And I would point out, you pointed out the vote on TARP, and that's a big difference between Ted Cruz and Donald Trump. Donald Trump did not oppose TARP. He spoke in favor of TARP. Bailout. Again, this is why you got these two anti-establishment candidates. The two anti-establishment candidates are considered to be Cruz and Trump, and they tend to make up over a majority of the Republican vote. But one of them, I really believe, is not anti-establishment, and so it's really bizarre to watch this. An establishment guy is definitely going to be with TARP. And so that tells you a lot right there. So it's a great point, that vote, Steve.
Let's take another phone call just before we have another break. And I'll jump to Georgia just before I go back to South Carolina. We have so many South Carolina calls. And, of course, you're only a week away from that, that vote. So I'd love to hear from you. But let's go to Tina for just a minute, because I think you have something that parallels what we just heard from Steve. So, Tina, go for it.
Hey, I appreciate this program so much. I just wanted to say I'm actually, this is strange, it's a God thing. I'm here to support Ted Cruz. I've never been to Savannah, Georgia before. I didn't know I was supposed to go to South Carolina. The Holy Spirit is leading me. That being said, so I'm not familiar with the area and everything, but that's why I called the church that he's going to be giving his testimony. I just wanted people to know about that. And the other thing was, I went to the Kim Davis rally back in the fall, and that was a God thing too. I'd never done anything like that before. God asked me to go and support her. Ted Cruz showed up there. I didn't know he was going to be there. He was the only other representative that we had, other than Mike Huckabee that was there. And at that time, I didn't know that it meant anything, but now that fast forward to what's going on now, I really believe that meant something, that he did that, and he stood, he's standing for Christian values. He's standing for us. And, and we cannot grieve the Holy Spirit by voting and getting Trump or even Marco Rubio in there. And I was pretty indecisive as far as Rubio and Cruz until today, when I started listening to more things and just the Holy Spirit actually revealing things to me, of things coming to fruition, what was going on. And so I'm just putting my support for Ted Cruz, and I'm here to do what I can to volunteer to help with his campaign, because I believe that's what God wants me to do. And we really have to stand together as Bible-believing Christians. This is not a test. God's got everything orchestrated. It's coming down. It's coming to pass. We really do not have much time. I believe that, in our day, we're going to see, we're seeing everything. Everything's lining up. Daniel 12, Ezekiel 38, 39, Revelation, everything's lining up. God's got all of it orchestrated, and it's not going to miss a beat. That being said, I know whoever he wants in there as president is going to be president. But I'm just saying I'm for Ted Cruz, and I'm going to do what I can to get to South Carolina from here. to help out his campaign. So
very good. We've got to go to a break, but there's somebody who's going to be at that church too. So I guess we gave a little publicity to that. Steve and Tina are going to be in that church, and maybe some of you can call back on Monday. Tell us what Ted Cruz said. Maybe I can even get the pastor to give me part of the clip. We'll play it on here. But we will also be covering on Monday the Republican presidential debate tomorrow night. I think a lot of people are going to be watching this.
I think so.
And I want to be watching it now to see what some of the callers and the questions say, and one of the guests say, that the moderators say, and the candidates say. So there'll be a lot of great opportunity to hear from them. We come back, though. We've been talking a little bit about religious liberty. Since we have Kelly Shackelford here, there are a couple issues you need to know about and pray about. So we'll talk about that right after this.
One thing that makes Israel such a wonderful destination for the Christian is that things the believers know to be true are affirmed there and illustrated in sharp relief. You expect that to happen when you walk where Jesus walked and when you view with your own eyes the places described in both the Old and New Testaments. But Israel is also a land of the unexpected. On a recent pilgrimage to the Holy Land, my second within 15 months, the unexpected took place. Our group visited Qasr el-Yahud, the site that commemorates the baptism of Christ. Matthew 3 describes how Jesus convinced a reluctant John the Baptist to baptize him. The pastor leading our group was also asked to do a baptism, a man in his early 40s who, along with his parents, was traveling with us. There was no reluctance on this pastor's part, only a set of pointed questions to determine if this man was ready to follow Christ. The air was slightly chilly, and the water of the Jordan River was chillier. The river, narrow at that spot, separates two countries, Israel and Jordan, by like 10 yards. All eyes were on the baptism. But as our new brother in Christ rose out of the water, we heard something, and our eyes went to a group of nuns gathered on the Jordan side, singing Amazing Grace. We joined in, as did other pilgrims. These nuns were Sisters of the Rosary and hailed from countries like Egypt and Lebanon. Because of their nationalities and the politics of the region, some could not have legally stood on our side of the river in Israel. And yet, as members of one body, we celebrated God's work in the life of one whom He has called. The pastor issued one simple instruction to the man he was baptizing. Remember that you are sealed by the Holy Spirit in baptism and marked as Christ's own forever. That night, the pastor blogged about this, calling it an international incident. You can read about it at AnglicanPastor.com. One of the sisters saw the story and contacted the pastor. The nuns, she said, would be praying for this young believer as he begins his walk with Christ. The two marveled at God's work that spans national and doctrinal divisions. Anglicans baptize by sprinkling, but this man wanted to be immersed, to go all in, as it were. We still had a bus ride, so he encouraged the pastor not to get into the cold, muddy river with him. The pastor would have none of it, saying, "No one is ever baptized alone." How true. Baptism is about much more than your particular and individual salvation. We are baptized into a worldwide body, into a community of believers, some whom we know and will know, and some we will never know this side of heaven. And at this, the nuns rejoice. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. We might be able to get another phone call in, but I did want to focus a little bit of time and attention on religious liberty and a couple of stories that Kelly maybe can address, and one of those is NASA. I've always appreciated NASA because they've been willing to accommodate religious faith, even back in the days when Madalyn Murray O'Hair was suing because they had communion on the moon and because they had talked and read from the Bible. And then all of a sudden we have this story. Then one I want to follow up on is a church that was cited for noise, and how, again, we're going against some of these churches. And so all of this is part of Liberty Institute, but we might mention that you're going to have a name change. And a couple of weeks ago, I almost said it and found out I'm not supposed to say it, but I think we can now announce it, can't we?
Yeah, they'll be the first to hear it because it's really going to be public Monday, but the website's already up and everything. And instead of Liberty Institute, we're First Liberty Institute, and really go by First Liberty because the First Liberty is religious freedom.
Perfect.
And so that's what we're going to be known by. So people can go to firstliberty.org if they want to look at any of the cases or just really anything on religious freedom. We try to have everything there so people can get their information.
Well, NASA's always been religion friendly up until a couple of weeks ago, right?
Yeah, you had the astronauts actually reading the Genesis account, going around the moon. You mentioned the lawsuit, of course, by Madeleine Murray O'Hara, which of course lost because we do have religious freedom in this country. But yeah, we represent a group of people who have worked at NASA for over 150 years. When you add them all together, they're a part of the praise and worship group. There are all kinds of groups, and most people recognize this at wherever they work. There's groups of different kinds, and their group exists. But they were told that everybody can make announcements about their groups in the newsletter, but they were told they can't use the word Jesus.
Uh-oh.
I mean, they were having a certain meeting on, I don't even remember the words right now, but it was basically, learning about Jesus or whatever was what the subject was. And the lawyers told them, you can't do that, that violates the Constitution, separation of church and state, essentially the Establishment Clause. And so we, went to them and said, well, ask and make sure that this is true and give them every chance to correct this. And they did. And they refused to budge. And so we had to send a demand letter after, about 5 or 6 months of them trying to get this rectified, and they couldn't. And the response by NASA was interesting. It was sort of encouraging, but at the same time it was so governmental because what they said is, we believe in religious freedom and we don't ban words. And it was like, and so therefore, you're like waiting. So I guess what they want to do is not admit that they had made a mistake publicly, although they know they made the mistake, and or they're throwing their lawyers under the bus or whatever. And so now it's just a matter, I guess, of going back and seeing if they do the censorship again, and if they do, then we'll have to proceed ahead legally. But I'm encouraged and hopeful that better people have gotten control of the situation, and maybe these people who have been working there for over 150 years are going to be treated without discrimination and told that, Jesus is not the new bad word at NASA.
And again, you can find a lot of this at First Liberty, so we've been announcing that. A lot of people have been asking me about what happened to that church that got themselves in, quote, trouble because of noise, because after all, this Sunday, some churches are going to have a little noise that might leak out of the sanctuary, and we don't want this to be a precedent that would say that you could use a noise ordinance to actually close down a church.
It's a frightening case, really. It's basically in the New Orleans area. Okay, that should tick you off right there. Of whoa, wait a second. They shut down the church, and the decibel level for the violation is 60 decibels. I was on Glenn Beck's TV show, and he pulled out a decibel reader. Our conversation right now, Kerby, violates the ordinance. Yeah. Any normal conversation is above the level.
Above 60.
Yeah, of 60.
I believe that.
And, these people at the church, not only did the pastor, they turned off all these sound equipment, they didn't use microphones, they did to try to be accommodating, and they still came out and cited and fingerprinted the pastor in front of the church.
Something's wrong there.
And we had to, we went to court. Unfortunately, the judge we got made a very poor decision, and so now we're having to appeal. The church just wants the protection to have their services on Sunday, and so now we're having to go to the Court of Appeals in Louisiana to try to get that for the church. But these are the kind of things that churches are having to go through that they didn't used to have to go through. When I started doing this work, but now we have to represent churches every week that are just trying to be the church.
You've had a couple of victories of the cross in Bladensburg, and you've had it looks like a victory with the Kuntz cheerleaders, and we've mentioned those in the past, but I know people tune in and tune out. So talk about just some of the other victories you've had recently.
Both good victories, but both not over.
Yeah,
so let's take Kuntz cheerleaders. What happened in Kuntz is the girls that had put, scripture verses on their own signs, and then the school district tried to stop them from doing that, and we won in the district court, won a constitutional decision that was going to be a good precedent. They then appealed, and the Court of Appeals decided that they'd rather skip the issue. So they said, well, the school says that they're not banning scripture verses right now, and so we're just going to say that everything's now moot and void, and we're going to erase everything and just pretend like none of this ever happened. And we're like, well, wait a second. There was a precedent here that was going to be useful for millions of people, millions of other kids. So we had to appeal the Texas Supreme Court.
That's
and
amazing.
8-0,
Yes.
they ruled.
Right.
And it was really remarkable because they said, you don't need to file your briefs. You don't need to come up here and argue. We're going to do this right now. Reversed, back down, and basically told them to do their job. So I say that because it's a great victory, but it's not over because now we got to go down and eventually, hopefully they'll keep appealing. This keeps getting higher level. We'll keep having more and more students that'll be protected. And the same thing with the Maryland Cross. This is a veterans memorial that's been up for over 90 years. It was put up not only by the American Legion, but by moms who had lost their sons in World War I. And the American Humanists brought a lawsuit to have it torn down. And we won a really strong victory at the federal district court. And people say, oh, that's great. Well, they've now appealed. So now this is going up to the Federal Court of Appeals, which is right under the U.S. Supreme Court. And we're hopeful that this thing will end up at the U.S. Supreme Court because there are memorials everywhere around the country with crosses and religious symbols. Mm-hmm. And we really need to stop all these attacks. They're happening everywhere. They make veterans, they bring back a lot of memories. It's kind of like being spit on when you come back from Vietnam. I mean, this really doesn't need to be happening. And until we get to the Supreme Court, we're not going to be able to stop this because the ACLU and these different groups, in this case, the American Humanists, want these crosses down from public. They don't want any religious symbols in public. And of course, Arlington Memorial Cemetery would be impacted. I mean, everywhere, every community you can think of around the country will be impacted. So those are some recent ones that are still going, and huge things are about to happen. Coach Joe Kennedy case is about to really rev up. One of the biggest ones that very few people know about is we're going to be before the Military Supreme Court. It's called the Court of Military Appeals. This spring in a major case. It's really going to be a landmark case on religious freedom in the military. The facts of the case were about a Marine who actually was court-martialed because she had a scripture verse taped to the bottom of her computer, but they've never really had a case on this issue, the issue of religious freedom. So this is literally like maybe in 1800 having the first religious liberty case at the U.S. Supreme Court. So those are all things that are coming, not mentioning the hundreds of others that are on our list, but those are the things that I think people can pay attention to. And they can go to firstliberty.org and look at any of the cases they'd like to.
I would encourage you to go to First Liberty. It's really beautiful, redesigned, a new logo, and all of those kinds of things. And of course, one of the obvious application points is you also need to know where these candidates stand on who they would put in the Supreme Court.
Exactly. Very important. Very, very, very important. Most of our decisions, like take the Mojave Desert Cross, 5-4. So you change one justice and the crosses go down. And so it's very important who's appointed to the Supreme Court.
Just about out of time, but Penna, I was just thinking it is Valentine's Day
Happy
this
Valentine's
Sunday.
Day, both you.
And I might just give everybody a warning. Of forgetting Valentine's Day, there are dire consequences, right?
Yes. Yes.
And I always know what Kelly's doing because his wife is the queen of Facebook, so I'm going to find out all things he does, and I've already taken some direction in that regard. We're going to take a break, and we will see you back here on Monday, and want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and all those involved in the process. We'll see you on Monday.
Later this year, for the 58th time, America will choose a president. As a Christian, what are you doing to prepare for the election? Helping you cut through the major media spin is part of the mission of Point of View. We want to provide the best election resources, including a new website, Pray, Organize, Vote, encouraging people to intercede for the upcoming election, to help you get registered so you can exercise the stewardship of voting, to share things to help you get people involved and out to the polls. But to do all of that, we need you to vote right now with your support for Point of View. Show us that you're in this for the long haul as a citizen of heaven as well as the United States. Click Donate Now at the top of the page and give the most generous one-time gift you can at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. There is a lot of work to be done. Let's get to it together. pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.